The moment I saw the photo, everything within me shattered. It wasn't just a glance, not an innocent mistake. No, the photograph was a perfectly framed masterpiece of betrayal. A snapshot taken at a clandestine moment, capturing my wife, Jenna, in a passionate embrace with another man. Her lips locked with his, her hands caressing his face, the same hands that had held mine for a decade, pledging eternal love and fidelity. I could almost hear her moans of pleasure in that frozen image, my mind racing to fill in the blanks. I had received the photo anonymously, tucked inside a plain white envelope with no return address. It was a workday like any other when I found it on my desk at home, but as soon as I tore it open and saw the contents, my world spiraled into a vortex of rage and despair. Every promise she ever made, every sweet word she whispered into my ear at night, turned into bitter lies in an instant. I stared at that photo for what felt like an eternity, my blood boiling under the surface, my heart pounding like a war drum. Questions flooded my mind. How long had this been going on? Who was this man? Was I just a fool all along, oblivious to the infidelity under my nose? The anger was overwhelming, a wildfire consuming every rational thought, leaving only one clear, undeniable truth. Jenna had to pay. And not just with tears or apologies. No, I wanted her to experience the same level of betrayal and heartbreak that she had inflicted upon me. I wanted her to suffer. But revenge, I knew, needed to be calculated, precise, and devastating. I had to play this game carefully, ensuring that every step I took would lead to her ultimate downfall. The first thing I had to do was gather more evidence. This single photograph wasn't enough. I needed to know how deep the rabbit hole went. So, I became a man with a mission. I started to follow Jenna, playing the role of a loving husband by day while turning into a silent shadow by night. My anger fueled me, kept me awake as I tracked her movements, scoured her social media accounts, and hacked into her email. Every secret she had hidden was going to be laid bare and every lie exposed. It wasn't long before I uncovered more. Late-night texts to an unknown number, secret meetings in places I had never heard of, and a burner phone she thought I'd never find. My wife had constructed an elaborate web of deception, and each thread I unraveled only deepened my resolve to make her pay for her betrayal. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized that this wasn't just about an affair. Jenna's betrayal went far beyond a mere lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate and calculated act of treachery. She had systematically siphoned money from our joint accounts into a secret stash, preparing for a life without me. The man in the photo was more than just a fling. He was a co-conspirator, a partner in her escape plan. She intended to leave me with nothing, not even my dignity. But Jenna had underestimated me. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't going to be her victim. I was going to be her executioner. And so, I began to devise my revenge. A plan so intricate and devastating that it would destroy everything she had built in her secret life. I started by pretending to be oblivious, playing the part of the loving husband while I secretly laid the groundwork for her downfall. I transferred small amounts of money from our accounts into a separate fund she knew nothing about, ensuring that when the time came, I would be financially secure. I installed surveillance cameras in our home, capturing every incriminating moment she spent talking to her lover. And I befriended people who could unknowingly provide me with the information I needed. Jenna's friends, colleagues, even her hairdresser. Everyone was a potential source of intel. As weeks turned into months, I continued to gather evidence, slowly building my case against her. I discovered the identity of her lover, a man named Eric, who worked with her at the same law firm. He was everything I wasn't, tall, suave, and handsome, the kind of man women dreamed about. But that only made my desire for revenge stronger. I wasn't just going to ruin Jenna's life. I was going to make sure Eric suffered too. Finally, the day came when I was ready to set my plan into motion. The perfect opportunity presented itself. A weekend getaway Jenna had planned with Eric under the guise of a business trip. She thought she was clever, booking a hotel far from home, but she had no idea that I had already tracked their every move. When she kissed me goodbye that Friday morning, I looked into her eyes, feigning affection as I whispered, "Have a great trip, darling." She smiled back at me, her eyes sparkling with deceit, and I felt a surge of satisfaction knowing that she had no idea what was coming. As soon as she left, I sprang into action. I had already packed a suitcase filled with everything I needed to execute my plan. I booked a room at the same hotel under a false name and made my way there, adrenaline coursing through my veins. When I arrived, I checked in and headed straight to the room next to theirs, where I set up my equipment. Hidden cameras, audio recorders, everything necessary to document their weekend of betrayal. I spent hours meticulously positioning everything, ensuring that I captured every moment of their time together. Jenna had no idea that her fantasy weekend was about to turn into a nightmare. As night fell, I watched through the monitor as they arrived at the hotel, laughing and holding hands as they made their way to their room. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't even notice the hidden camera in the hallway. I felt a pang of rage as I watched Jenna wrap her arms around Eric, kissing him with a passion she hadn't shown me in years. But I pushed the anger down, focusing on the task at hand. This was just the beginning. I recorded everything. Their conversations, their intimate moments, their plans to run away together. It was all there, irrefutable evidence of their betrayal. By Sunday morning, I had everything I needed. I had spent the entire weekend recording their affair, and now it was time to confront them. But I wasn't going to do it in private. No, I wanted an audience. I wanted everyone to see the truth, to witness Jenna's humiliation and the destruction of her carefully constructed lie. I made a few phone calls, ensuring that the right people would be at the hotel that morning. Then, I waited. My heart pounded in my chest as the clock ticked down to the moment of truth. Finally, the time came. I made my way to their room, my hand trembling slightly as I knocked on the door. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps approaching. The door opened, and there stood Jenna, her face draining of color as she saw me standing there. "What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice trembling with fear. I didn't answer. Instead, I pushed past her, stepping into the room. Eric was standing by the bed, his shirt half-buttoned, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. I looked at both of them, a smile creeping onto my face as I pulled out the remote control for the hidden cameras. "I thought you might want to see this," I said, pressing the button. The television flickered to life, displaying the footage I'd recorded over the weekend. Jenna's face turned ghostly white as she realized what was happening. Eric's eyes widened in horror as he watched himself on the screen, his betrayal laid bare for all to see. And then, as if on cue, the door burst open behind me, and in walked the hotel manager, followed by several of Jenna's colleagues from the law firm. The shock and disbelief on their faces as they took in the scene was priceless. "I think this is yours," I said, tossing the remote onto the bed. Jenna reached for it, but her hands were shaking so badly that she dropped it. I turned to leave, but not before giving her one last look. "You thought you could betray me and get away with it," I said, my voice cold and unforgiving. "But now, everyone knows who you really are. Enjoy the rest of your life, Jenna. You've lost everything." I walked out of the room, leaving them to their shame and humiliation. As I made my way down the hall, I felt a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in years. Jenna's betrayal had been a knife to the heart, but now that wound was healing, replaced by the sweet taste of revenge. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into another hotel across town, taking some time to savor my victory. I knew that when I returned, the aftermath of what I had done would be waiting for me, and I wanted to be fully prepared. The next morning, I woke up early and turned on the television, eager to see if the scandal had made the news. Sure enough, there it was. Jenna's name plastered all over the headlines, her career in tatters, her reputation destroyed. The footage I had recorded had gone viral, shared on social media by everyone who had witnessed it. By the time I left the hotel, Jenna was the talk of the town. I made my way back to our house, expecting to find her gone. But when I pulled into the driveway, I was surprised to see her car still there. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should confront her again, but then decided against it. I had said everything I needed to say the night before. When I walked into the house, I found her sitting in the living room, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and despair. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded, her voice shaking with fury. I crossed my arms, meeting her gaze without flinching. "You brought this on yourself, Jenna. You thought you could betray me and walk away without consequences. But now you know what it feels like to lose everything." She stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "I made a mistake, all right? I never meant for it to go this far, but you destroyed my life." I felt a surge of satisfaction at her words, but I didn't let it show. "You destroyed your own life, Jenna. I just made sure everyone saw the truth. Now you have to live with the consequences." She glared at me, tears streaming down her face. "I hate you," she spat, her voice filled with venom. "I'll never forgive you for this." I shrugged, unfazed by her words. "I don't need your forgiveness, Jenna. You're the one who has to live with what you've done. As for me, I'm moving on." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, broken and defeated. I didn't look back as I made my way to the bedroom, packing a suitcase with my clothes and belongings. I was done with Jenna, done with the lies and the betrayal. It was time to start a new chapter in my life, one that didn't include her. As I loaded my suitcase into the car, I felt a sense of relief washing over me. The anger that had consumed me for so long was finally fading, replaced by a sense of closure. Jenna had paid for her betrayal, and now I was free to move on. But as I drove away from the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Jenna had been my wife for 10 years, and the bond we shared, however twisted it had become, wouldn't be easily severed. I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight, and part of me was already bracing for the next battle. Over the next few weeks, the fallout from the scandal continued to spread. Jenna's law firm fired her, citing the moral and ethical breach exposed by the video. Her friends turned their backs on her, unwilling to be associated with someone whose private life had become public gossip. Even her family distanced themselves, ashamed of the disgrace she had brought upon them. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life. I found a new apartment in the city, far away from the house I had shared with Jenna. I cut ties with everyone who knew us as a couple, starting fresh in a place where I could be anonymous. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, I felt the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders. But Jenna wasn't ready to let go. She began calling me, leaving messages filled with anger, regret, and desperation. At first, I ignored her, deleting the voicemails without listening to them. But then, the calls became more frequent, more insistent, until finally, I couldn't ignore them any longer. One night, after weeks of silence, I answered the phone. Jenna's voice came through, trembling with emotion. "Please, Michael," she begged. "I'm sorry. I know I hurt you, but we can't just throw away everything we had. We can work through this." I felt a pang of bitterness at her words. "Work through this?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think we can just go back to the way things were after everything you've done?" She hesitated, then spoke in a whisper. "I made a mistake. I know that now. But I still love you, Michael. I don't want to lose you." I was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Despite everything, part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the love we once shared. But I knew better. The trust had been shattered, and no amount of apologies could fix that. "It's too late, Jenna," I said finally, my voice cold and detached. "What we had is gone. You destroyed it the moment you decided to betray me." She started to cry, her sobs echoing through the phone. "Please, Michael, don't do this. I can't live without you." I felt a surge of anger at her desperation, the same anger that had fueled my need for revenge. "You should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with another man," I snapped. "This is your punishment, Jenna. You wanted to live a double life, and now you have nothing." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. I was done with her tears, done with her lies. "Don't call me again," I said, my voice final. We're finished. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. As I sat there in the darkness, I realized that this was the closure I had been searching for. Jenna was out of my life for good, and I was free to move on. But even as I tried to convince myself of this, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna wasn't done with me. She had lost everything, and she was desperate. I knew she would try to fight back, to reclaim what she had lost. And part of me was ready for that battle, ready to face whatever came next. Because now it wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival. The months following my last conversation with Jenna were eerily quiet. I had anticipated retaliation, but instead, she vanished from my life as if she had never existed. The phone call stopped, the emails ceased, and her presence on social media faded into obscurity. It was as if the woman I had once loved had become a ghost. But I knew better than to let my guard down. Jenna was many things, but a quitter wasn't one of them. She was plotting something. I could feel it in my bones. The calm was merely the precursor to a storm, and I was determined to be ready when it hit. I threw myself into my work, taking on new clients and projects that kept me busy from dawn until dusk. My new apartment became a sanctuary, a fortress where I could keep the world at bay. I severed ties with anyone who might still be connected to Jenna, determined to start fresh, free from the shadow of our shared past. But despite my best efforts to move on, the memory of what had happened lingered. A dark cloud that hung over every aspect of my life. The satisfaction I had felt in exposing Jenna's betrayal had faded, replaced by an emptiness that gnawed at me in the quiet moments. I had gotten my revenge, but at what cost? I had lost my marriage, my home, and a decade of my life. One evening, as I was returning home from work, I noticed a figure standing near the entrance to my building. The streetlights cast a dim glow on her face, but there was no mistaking who it was. Jenna had found me. I hesitated for a moment, considering turning back, but then I steeled myself and walked toward her. She looked different, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. Her once vibrant hair now dull and lifeless. She was a shell of the woman I had known. "Michael?" she said softly as I approached. Her voice was shaky, almost pleading. "What are you doing here, Jenna?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing how much her presence unsettled me. "I need to talk to you," she replied, her eyes locking onto mine. "Please, just give me a few minutes." I sighed, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "Fine," I said after a moment, gesturing toward a nearby bench. "Talk." We sat down, the distance between us feeling like a chasm. Jenna took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I know you have no reason to believe me," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've changed, Michael. These past few months have been hell for me. I've lost everything. My job, my friends, my family. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did to you, and I realize now how much I've hurt you." Her words were laced with sincerity, but I wasn't sure if I could trust them. "Is this another one of your games, Jenna?" I asked, my voice cold. "Are you hoping I'll feel sorry for you?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve this conversation. But I've hit rock bottom, and I needed to see you, to tell you how sorry I am." There was a vulnerability in her voice that I hadn't heard before, and for a moment, I almost believed her. But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, the lies, and I hardened my heart. "What do you want from me, Jenna?" I asked, my tone harsh. "You've already apologized. You've admitted you were wrong. But that doesn't change what happened. It doesn't undo the damage you've done." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I don't want anything from you, Michael," she said, her voice trembling. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry, and that I'm leaving." "Leaving?" I echoed, surprised. "Where are you going?" "Out of state," she replied, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I've found a job in another city. It's not much, but it's a chance to start over. I can't stay here, not after everything that's happened. There's nothing left for me here. I studied her face, searching for any signs of deceit, but all I saw was a woman who had lost everything and was desperately trying to salvage what little remained of her life. I wanted to see you one last time before I left, she continued, her voice breaking, to tell you that I'm sorry for everything, and to ask if maybe one day you could find it in your heart to forgive me. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with emotion. I wanted to stay angry, to cling to the bitterness that had fueled me for so long. But as I looked at Jenna, I realized that holding on to that anger wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't bring back the years we had lost, nor would it heal the wounds we had inflicted on each other. I don't know if I can forgive you, Jenna, I said after a long silence. But I do know that holding on to this anger isn't helping either of us. Maybe it's time to let go. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. That's all I needed to hear. We sat there for a few more minutes, neither of us speaking. There was nothing left to say. The chapter of our lives that had been filled with love, betrayal, and revenge was finally closing. Eventually, Jenna stood up, wiping away the last of her tears. Goodbye, Michael, she said softly, her voice filled with sadness and regret. Goodbye, Jenna, I replied, my voice equally subdued. And with that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I knew this was the end, truly the end. Jenna was gone, and so was the part of my life that had revolved around her. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't felt in months. The anger and bitterness that had consumed me were finally starting to fade, replaced by a sense of peace. Jenna was out of my life for good, and now I could truly begin to move on. But this time, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about healing, about finding a way to live again after the storm had passed. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding myself, not just physically, but emotionally. I started therapy, working through the pain and anger that had been festering inside me for so long. I reconnected with old friends, people who had known me before Jenna and who could remind me of who I was without her. Life slowly began to take on a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around the past. I found new hobbies, new passions, and even started dating again, though cautiously. The scars of what had happened with Jenna would always be there, but they no longer defined me. One day, months after Jenna had left, I received a letter in the mail. It was from her, postmarked from the city where she had started her new life. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what it would contain, but then curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short, just a few paragraphs, but it was filled with sincerity. Jenna wrote about her new life, how she was trying to be a better person, and how she hoped I was finding happiness as well. She didn't ask for forgiveness again, nor did she try to rekindle what was lost. She simply wished me well and hoped that one day we could both look back on our time together without bitterness. I folded the letter and put it away, feeling a strange sense of contentment. Jenna and I would never be together again, but in that moment, I realized that we had both found something more important than revenge: closure. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The past was behind me, and the future was mine, to shape however I wanted. I wasn't the man who had been betrayed, nor was I the man who had sought revenge. I was just Michael, a man who had survived the storm and come out the other side stronger. And as I stood there, looking out at the city that was now my home, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready for it. The ultimate revenge hadn't been destroying Jenna's life. It had been reclaiming my own. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered.